Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the March 30th radio address. I'm Peter, and hope everyone's doing well out there. I have a lot of stuff to run down today, and specifically want to focus on questions for this radio show. But first, we've got a ton of stuff to slam through. Zeitgeist Day 2010 was a tremendously successful event day. London event was really wonderful. I'm still waiting to get all of the wonderful lectures online. We had some really great new speakers come forward for the main event, and it was just great to see, and take a lot of weight off of myself and a lot of others that have continually kind of taken this burden, and it's finally kind of flourishing, and it's a really nice thing to see. And also, I was watching all of the other lectures that were occurring that were posted on YouTube from around the world, and was equally as impressed. And this is where it kind of begins. We have to get people out there that know how to consider the questions that are very common and basically just continue to reiterate this information and engage the value systems and conflicts that naturally come with the representation of this information, as I think we've all come to understand. There's a lot of projection, a lot of misinterpretation, and but anyway, point being is that it was really excellent. I think we ended up with about 250 really solid events. We've been getting some great feedback. If you have some press and some videos, we're in a process of collecting videos as we speak. But we did have an email through zdayglobal.org, but you can also send any press to media@thezeitgeistmovement.com, media@thezeitgeistmovement.com. We're going to get the site updated. Everyone's been very scattered. We're all volunteers here, so it's always a little bit slow for us to get things going. But we can talk about that actually a little bit more. I'm going to be doing a great deal of overhauling, working with many to overhaul the main website, get some more team orientations going, to begin better updates of news, to have more focus on the front page regarding, say, the breakdown of society, all the things that have been happening almost on a daily basis. Coupled, of course, with Zeit News, which is tremendous, really good information that's been coming through with that organization, that sub-organization, if you will. And basically, we need to get our stuff together. We have a very large audience that has emerged, and we're not moving as fast as we need to be. Unfortunately, it comes down on me quite a bit. Since the beginning of all of this, I've sort of had to be the central organizer, or I guess my position as a global coordinator. It all kind of falls on me at the very, very end, and that's going to have to stop. We have to get these teams active and working independently. I can't keep this stuff together myself. It's virtually impossible. And unfortunately, as time moves forward, as much as I hate to say it, it's going to get worse. I've got a very long recovery period from the expense of Zeitgeist moving forward. I have contract work coming up that I have to do. And basically, I know some of you out there try to get in touch with me. It can take me up to 2 weeks to email people back. I really apologize about that, but I'm sorry to say it's going to get worse. So I have to begin a very serious process of delegation for the benefit of the movement itself and, of course, my own sanity. I sit far too often at a computer. I have no health insurance. I've got back problems. But anyway, I'm not going to complain about that, but just please know that we're trying to get a lot of people together for various issues. The coordinators, for example, I would like the coordinators to come together, and we're going to talk about this in some other meetings, to begin to take the reins on the global site to make sure the global site is much more dynamic than it has been. There's just every day there's new news about what's happening. There's new inventions, new scientific discoveries, these global events, catastrophes like Japan. I mean, in and of itself, the Japan catastrophe just is a case in point about what this system reinforces and how long the recovery period is going to be for Japan, how no one's made any initiative to really target the true enemies of human civilization, which are these natural disasters and diseases. This is where all of our attention should be going, We have all these scientists in the Pentagon working on how to kill people. If we simply had all the scientific minds come together to address how to deter natural events like tsunamis, earthquakes, tornadoes, how to deal with those, how to create the correct infrastructure that can sustain them, and all of that. Think about the progress that we would have, Think back to Indonesia and the incredible death toll that took. this is really where it's at. I mean, I could ramble on quite a bit. 500,000 people dying in car accidents. We pine over people dying in war. 3,000 Americans die in Iraq, and everyone throws their hands up over 3,000 died in 9/11. But yet we're systematically slaughtering ourselves through inefficiency and technology, making our life so much more dangerous than it really needs to be. But everyone thinks of that as normality. So I hope you see my point. I'm not going to go on a big tangent on that. But point being, there's all sorts of information out there and all sorts of new stuff occurring that we have to be on par with and we have to get together. In fact, I'm going to jump right now into the newsletter team once again, which I have been absent from, and I apologize. The newsletter and press release team, this is really, really important. With the 500,000 members, we have some pretty powerful syndication, if you will, to put it gesturally. We have people that really do work to get our message out there. All of us work to get our message out there, but we have to have a message to get out there. So I want to reiterate again, as I've made the call before, we really need people to create press releases and to join the newsletter team to really get data out there so we can create semi-daily or if not bi-weekly releases about current events that are occurring right now. Almost everything comes back to the reasoning of a resource-based economy. The world is falling apart. The revolutions are falling like dominoes in the Middle East. The United States, Britain, the protests that are happening in the educational system in Britain. We need to be pinging the community about all of this and continually reminding everybody about what this would mean in a resource-based economy, the intrinsic flaws of the current system and how they could be fixed, and all of the stress and nonsense and austerity and all the suffering that is currently happening and is going to continue to grow, how unnecessary that is. We need to make sure that reality gets out there as much as possible. At the end of the day, that's all we can really do. So I send that point again. Newsletter at thezeitgeistmovement.com. If you have a press release that you'd like to write, please join our forums and submit it there, and we can feel it out, flesh it out, to see what will make it into a global syndication, if you will, through all of our chapters and everything else. Very, very important. So let's see, what else do we have as far as projects? The Why I Advocate campaign has hundreds and hundreds of wonderful submissions. In fact, I recently took my original one down because I'm going to redo it with about 20 to 40 points regarding why I advocate and make it a very solid presentation, not the informal one I had before. So I'm going to be doing that as well. But it's great to see, and tzm.tv is still being overhauled and is in the works, and we're going to have more kind of interactive features like that, just so everyone understands what the community is up to and what the community's pace is. This community has to have a face, and it's very important that the public begin to see that this is a community. This is a group of people that are concerned, that want to improve the world, and are going to continue to work to do so. And we will be paid attention to one way or another. They can rest assured with that. Let's see, the Zeitgeist Media Festival. This is a big one. Sorry to jump around a little bit here, but the Zeitgeist Media Festival, headlined in Los Angeles. A lot of great performers already agreed to do this. I'm working on this. I'm actually going to go see an event space very soon. We have some really wonderful prospects to make this an enlightening event, both a celebration of life, but also raising social awareness and consciousness of not just the movement, but everything that goes along with the movement in a resource-based economy. It's a slightly more open idea. People that participate don't necessarily have to be absolutely in line, but they should have a social conscience about what's happening in the world, and sharing ways and communicating ways through art that they feel can improve this. Really, it's a value communication. And I've talked about that before, but that is coming up, and there's a lot of great excitement out there. This will, I think, be a global event day as well, just like Zeitgeist Day. But it's to be a little less organized than what we do with Zeitgeist Day as far as the interconnectivity and the mapping of it. But I'm not quite sure how it can unfold yet, so it'll be great one way or another. But I'm going to focus simply on the main event for California, and we'll take it from there, and I'll keep you guys posted on how things work with that. We've also had a lot of musicians that, underground musicians or I hate it, not underground, but, not publicly acknowledged musicians contact me and many other people about wanting to perform, and we're going to do the best we can. There's only so much time we can allot for this, but an all-day festival or maybe a 2-day festival can work out for this. But we'll see how it goes. I'm still working on that. And what else do we have here? Going back to my time issue that I mentioned in passing earlier, and the site overhaul and the need to create more to larger order teams and some better organizational issues. Again, I could go. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I could go crazy talking about all the things I've tried to put in order. But there's been far too much reliance on myself, and there's also been far too much reliance on myself with regard to communicative things. And this is something else that needs to be changed, due both to my schedule and to this sort of, well, there's a rhetoric out there that I've seen that seems to think that I come up with the things that I talk about, as though I'm just inventing these things as a form of opinion, Peter Joseph's ideas, when that doesn't exist. I am nothing but a messenger and assessor, if you will, of different data points and simply regurgitating that information. I'm a vehicle of data relay, and that's that. The same goes with Jacques Fresco. He's obviously much more informed as I am, with 95 years of tremendous experience and life's work. But we have to remember that it all comes down to data, one way or another. The individuals don't matter. And I think a good way to diffuse this idea that I am just sort of the hub of something, which is not the case whatsoever, is to get other players that can express this direction. We need more faces to come forward. So one thing that's going to happen is this radio show is no longer going to be the Peter Joseph radio show as it's titled. It's going to be the ZM Global radio show. And we're going to start rotating the hosts of this show. Hopefully we'll do this every week as opposed to the intermittent nature of it as it has been since my schedule's been so bad. But Sir Ben McLeish of the UK chapter I'm hoping to pull in as the first round of this to begin, just moving from different chapter coordinators or high-level speakers and all of, well, obviously they have to speak English, I think. This is more of the Western show. But that might change. But, overall English is more common, I think, than any language, at least universally shared in a multilingual sense. So that's probably our best language to deal with right now. But I want to bring in other people. So I have a whole list of people I've spoken with and have met that do very well in explaining different points, and could even have novel programs that can describe different angles, different colors, different forms of communication that I'm simply not capable of doing. So that's important for diversity. So that being stated, let me see what else I have here. Yes, Zeitgeist Day 2012. We covered Zeitgeist Day 2011. Zeitgeist Day 2012, I've given some thought to this. 2012 is very interesting because it's an election year in the West. If everyone pays attention to American elections, it's going to be particularly comical, considering the people I see lining up to be involved in the American election and just the rogue degeneration of any form of competency. I've even joked to say that the Zeitgeist Movement should come behind Sarah Palin, and we'll work to support Sarah Palin, and we'll simply call it the Who Gives a Damn campaign. The Who Gives a Damn campaign. Let's just vote for anyone, get the most incompetent person to head essentially the leader of the globe, which is the United States. Because that's going to happen anyway. And really, who cares? Who cares who gets elected to office at this stage when you actually understand what the underlying mechanics are that rule and set the game rules, if you will, for everything that unfolds from one administration to another. The Obama administration, its attack on Libya, is nothing more than an extension of the Bush Doctrine, an extension of John Bolton's axis of evil that Bush put forward in his State of the Union. Nothing's changed, nothing new under the sun. Doesn't matter what happens, doesn't matter which president is in power. The same agendas unfold. So hopefully people are slowly beginning to pick that up. But nevertheless, the Who Gives a Damn campaign. We're probably not going to do that, but I do find some basic amusement with that idea. Z-Day 2012, that's what I was talking about. Z-Day 2012, so I'm thinking since we have the election year, and we have this sort of spooky metaphysical thing that everyone keeps harping upon, I'm really bored by it, but I will state that I feel that by the time 2012 hits, you're going to see a very alienated population. We're going to run the course of even more revolutions, more social instability, more unemployment, more poverty, and more suffering. And by the time 2012 hits, I think it will reach a kind of a capitulation point, at least within the public frustration. And what I'm thinking is in New York City, we do a big event. Zeitgeist Day, of course, always has its so-called main event. It was in London this year. It was in New York the past 2 years. I say we go back to New York, but we make a much larger event, not just for the 1,000, 1,200 people we have usually that are always sold out, but we shoot for 5, 6, 7, 8,000 people. And we try to make an event that the mainstream media simply cannot ignore. Now, I have a number of venues in the back of my mind for this, and I think based on the numbers that I've tracked, we could get 10,000 people if people really wanted to make the move, to make the trip to New York to support this. And this is something that we have to flesh out. The venues I'm looking at are exceedingly expensive. There's numerous New York venues, including Madison Square Garden, that I have that could work out very, very well and that are, in fact, available. But it's a big financial burden, and I have to kind of give a better numerical sense of what we can expect. So I might actually throw up a poll or something very soon, or send out an email to try and get a sense of who would be willing to represent and come and create a large global unified meeting, a unified event to show the world and the mainstream media that we're extremely serious and that the world is changing and a new consciousness is developing, and that we're no longer going to suffer the nonsensical, jingoistic, sovereignistic, mafiaistic, detached frame of reference that is insufficient and destroying us as time moves forward. So many different angles on that. But this is where I think something could come. I'm not going to ramble on about it. I need to think about it some more. But I think it could be very effective. I think it could be very effective to have such an event with 5,000 to 10,000 people. And if that type of those numbers could be met, we could even engage in other awareness orientations. Some permits could be obtained to bring awareness, maybe down on Wall Street, in the financial center. I wouldn't consider it a protest. I would consider it an awareness event. And I think that just about does it for little introductory things. Again, I want to thank everybody for Zeitgeist Day 2011. It was really fantastic, and I'm continually getting more and more good feedback. And it's really amazing that we're able to continue this momentum in the way that we have. So, thank you very much, and let's jump straight into the questions. Question one: what do you think of the idea of creating an individual Tumblr blog for each chapter and linking them together, creating a mass online social media presence? Tumblr. Yep, I think any type of social media presence is a great idea. We are in the process of updating our Facebook, getting Twitter's official, and I think that one might be on our list as well. So yes, I think that's a great idea. Question 2. I noticed on the Z-Day 2011 global map that there still isn't much activity in Africa or Asia. Do you have any thought on how we could reach those that live in those areas? The majority of the human population lives in Africa and Asia in well under normal living standards. One would think that our ideas could get a positive reception. End of question. Well, I obviously couldn't agree more. It's an unfortunate reality of that sad continent known as Africa. That, as an aside, I was just listening to the nonsense coming from the Obama administration about Libya and how it's all about protecting the civilian. They shoot Tomahawk missiles over, but it's about peacekeeping and protecting civilians. If the United States cared about the protection of any civilians, we would have 100,000 to 200,000 troops protecting the poor citizens of the Congo right now that have continually been systematically slaughtered and mutilated and raped, again, atrocious forms of human behavior that can only come from the highest levels of deprivation. So, I cringe when I think of the horrors of what occurs in the dark continent of Africa. But with regard to your question, all I can say is we're going to have to find other ways to get to them through non-internet-based means. We do have a South African chapter, but I don't know to the extent that they're capable of doing much. That's just an unfortunate reality. I wish I could give you more information. Number 3, could you elaborate on social relativism versus the scientific method? Some people within the movement are afflicted with this, that, quote, everyone's right, or everything's just an opinion, which makes discussions utterly useless, end of question. Social relativism, I think I used the term cultural relativism, which essentially means that someone views something different from another based on their cultural experience. So if someone's very Christian and someone's atheistic, the belief of the two could be considered culturally relativistic. But yet when it comes to science, obviously the atheistic perspective holds about a zillion times more gravity, for there's nothing in the physical world that can prove the existence of deities. There's no provable way to do it. You can't use science, hence the invention of faith, which is the staple of religious thought. So cultural relativism versus the scientific method, at the end of the day, it's pretty obvious to tell the difference between the two. Anything that someone points out as a point of data that can't be tested or can't be at least comprised by the tests of sub-attributes, if you know what I'm referring to, then you probably have an opinionated type of idea as opposed to a scientific one. No, everyone is not right, values are not equal, and no, everything is not just an opinion. This is pretty much self-evident, so I'm not quite sure how else to elaborate on it. Basically, you can see the difference between opinion and fact because one of them can actually be tested and replicated, and one of them can only be supported through commentary and faith, if you will. So that's the way I would differentiate between the two. Number 4, what would you say to people who state that philosophies don't enter in the realm of science, that they are not technical questions, and that they cannot be scientifically explained? Philosophies are not technical questions, they cannot be explained. There are some people who say this in here, I assume they mean the forum, despite our official description of applying the scientific method for social concern, and, quote, all problems are technical, unquote, end of question. The very basis of philosophy is language and different forms of thought, and thought and language are technical constructs. There are semantic interpretations to language, but there's a spectrum of semantic interpretations. And again, cultural relativism can come into play with the interpretations of semantics, so you end up with a whole kind of messy scenario, but at the end of the day, the thought process itself, regardless if it's, quote, philosophy or not, it can still be technically broken down if you're dealing with propositions. Depends on the nature of the philosophical point. Some philosophical points are naturally extremely esoteric, are incalculable, there's no way to quantify them. So, they fall victim to just speculation, ultimately. But other philosophical points, true propositions that can be tested, the language evaluated and deduced, it's pretty clear that all language orientations, if you're seeking a goal with that language, is a technical process of communication. Even when you're dealing with a spectrum of human semantic influence and projections, it's still technical, regardless of the fact that it's not honed in on as some human, comprehension, some human universal form of comprehension. I'm trying to think of an example for that. I can say up, there's up, we're going up. Of course, we're not really going up, we're going out, but everyone kind of knows what up is, so there's a very technical issue to that. So from a state of philosophy, if you were to say something, it's a philosophy to recognize up and down, as ridiculous as that sounds, you still see it's a technical perspective based on some type of referent, which can be deduced and presented in a tangible physical way. So all problems, in fact, are technical, and there's nothing I can think of that isn't technical at the end of the day when you break it down. If someone has an example of something, I can assure you that if you break down the language you're using, if you break down the concepts themselves, the nouns and the verbs, you end up with a complete technical orientation. So I can't think of a better way to describe it than that. I can't think of anything that isn't technical. I'm sorry. If you want to give me an exact example, feel free to do so. Number 5, I remember you saying that once the monetary system is replaced with the resource-based economy, 90% of crime would be erased essentially. However, won't crimes committed because of religious differences still be a major problem? How could we bridge the differences between, let's say, Jews and Muslims? End of question. Excellent question. Obviously, I say 90 to 95% of crime because it is monetary related, but there are other neuroses of the culture, jealousy, different levels of, culturally induced competition. I mean, men are still dumb enough in this culture that they'll get into fights over women. You know what I mean? It's a lot of old baggage that's around. So, as far as the religious argument, that's just another example of that problem. The differences between religious groups or any group, whether it's race relations, class relations, religious relations, this is what we do hope to overcome with the movement and these values that bring us back to the life ground that show we all need the same thing. We all are on the same page on this basic level. So we have to learn at least to work together on that level. So my hope would be that the disputes between religious segments of the society won't erupt into something that would be considered, quote, criminal or violent, and they can just exist ideologically. That's the best you can hope for until, again, this sort of basic scientific unfolding continues to erode the superstitious train of thought, which shows more or less all signs of doing so, at least in the West. It's kind of difficult to measure because of the growing Muslim population, but it's also a lack of education and the imposition of state power and reinforcements of these ideas, of these control mechanisms that continues to produce generation after generation of people that believe these things that control them. Anyway, I'm not going to go on that big tangent, but I will say that at the end of the day, my biggest concern with religion is the divisive nature of it. It's really what, for example, Zeitgeist, the movie Part 1 was about. It's summarized at the very end of that section, that it's used politically, it's used to divide, it's used to control. It's just another form of divide and conquer. And even in the modern day, those divisions have been used, say, by Bush. He tried to paint the Iraq War and the Middle East wars as a religious war. A lot of people followed through with that. And there's a lot of insanity in that world, but we can only do the best we can. So we start with the monetary crime, and then we try to slowly erode through all the superstitious things that divide people. And at the end of the day, hope that people begin to see eye to eye, at least on the basic necessities of life and what we need to do to make a system that can provide that for everyone. Number 6, if you could ask any questions to people such as David Icke, what would they be? How do you go about getting the followers into a realistic mindset? Which questions would you pose? Well, first of all, I have nothing against David Icke as an individual. I assume you're referring to the more metaphysical ideas that cannot be measured, tested, or founded. I mean, reptilian shapeshifters, that always sparks a lot of smirking and laughter. He has this train of thought that supports it, going back to Zecharia Sitchin and all of these things. To me, it's just another religion, just as blind as the Judeo-Christian Bible come the ancient Sumerian tablets. There's more to it than that, and I'm not trying to rail any concept, and I certainly don't care to get into an argument. At the end of the day, I don't care. The fact is that when I talk to anybody about esoteric issues, the people that bring up the New World Order, the New World Order is a great example. People say, well, what about the New World Order? I say, listen, even if everything that people say about the New World Order was true, even if the conspiracy was right, and you have this subculture of people that want this corporate bank-controlled world government and depopulate the planet and bring in a one-world religion, how does complaining about that and trying to find the source of that accomplish anything? Is George Bush in the New World Order? Is David Rockefeller in the New World Order? Are they meeting under Iron Mountain? Or where is it taking place? What the real reality is, you're dealing with value system disorders and hegemonic imperialism that goes back to the end of time. All the New World Order is an imperialistic notion that has existed through every major imperialistic idea, and there's no difference with it than anything else that has ever occurred through history. And now it's just huge, diluted speculation, and I won't even go into that insanity. And what I say to people that believe things like that, I say, well, what is it? What are you going to do about it? And they really don't have a clue. They think listening to Alex Jones or buying lots of DVDs and books on the subject can actually do something to counter this nefarious group of globalists that want to kill everybody. The fact is, the only way you can counter anything is to show the true path. In other words, all the problems in any form of activist orientation sets up an us against them, and we have to get beyond that. There's no one to fight anymore. It doesn't even matter if the New World Order was real. It doesn't matter at all, because if we can get the rationale of a sustainable, working, unified society together, a society that's actually balanced so conflicts don't arise. We're talking sustainability not just ecologically, not just for the human organism individually, but social sustainability, which means a lack of conflict, which means people understanding and having a mutual respect of each other. This is what we have to aspire to, and I believe that a resource-based economy, when you take the ground-up logic of it, is the epitome of the solution. It is the solution to all of those issues. It's not about fighting anymore. It's about getting everyone on the right track. The New World Order, whether real or not, have nothing if the public is willing to see what a true sustainable economy is, true sustainable social system is, a true method of working together in a democratic way, if you will, where everyone has a say and everyone is truly free. If people can understand what that means and how to get there, the entire, every problem essentially with this us against them neuroses vanishes into thin air. So I'm happy that was brought up in abstraction, because of course I'm so frustrated with what I call the New World disorder, and this subculture of people that don't know what they're talking about, are based on absolute delusion, and they draw paint these pictures of this material corrupt class that doesn't exist, by pulling data from a billion different sources and lumping it all together. Oh, Carol Quigley said this, or the Rosetta Stones, or the Georgia Guidestones, and they put all this crap together. Ooh, and Kissinger said this, and they just amalgam this. I mean, I'm sorry, but Alex Jones is the epitome of this, and he's a magician when it comes to taking shit that doesn't have any relationship to anything and hodgepodging it together and throwing it in the oven, and boom, pops out the New World Order pie. So it's very frustrating, and I'm sorry to deviate from your question, and I know David Icke has the same type of global conspiracy angle as well. And the end solution, at the end of the day, even if it was real, is simply to get the public to see what actually works to create a sustainable society, which is a completely technical orientation. And if you can do that, then all of that shit just falls to the wayside and has no effect one way or another. So I think I answered your question. 4, 5, 6, 7. Number 7. I completely follow Jacques' reasoning on why he isn't, why he isn't handing out blueprints for his inventions to the public for fear that they might be subverted. But are there plans for him to release any more actual teaching materials in the vein of those drawing lessons which were circulated a while ago, or does that fall under the same umbrella of secret till the time is right? End of question. Well, Jacques, at 95, he's produced a tremendous amount of lectures. Naturally, there's all sorts of stuff that the Venus Project has, and there's a ton of stuff online. There's countless interviews now. As far as an actual controlled teaching arrangement, we've talked about this numerous times, and I've talked about it with many different people in the movement. And the idea was to basically kind of generate a course that goes subject by subject, because it's so bewildering when you hit people with all the content, all the relevant issues that we pertain to the logic for resource-based economy. It's very daunting for those that have never heard of it, and of course they project like hell, and all they see is communism and Marxism and all of the stuff that, of course, anyway, I won't even go on that tangent. But, the blueprints for his inventions, he's been ripped off far too much, and the blueprints don't matter. We understand the technical viability of everything we talk about. The technical viability isn't the problem, and I challenge anyone to come up with a technical assessment that of these ideas that would generate a problem. Please bring that up. I've yet to see one. If everything is within the realm of things we already do today, they just have to be scaled out, expanded, and improved. So I hope we can get a course type of arrangement together as far as education. I'm going to talk to him more about that in the future. We've talked about it numerous times, and I've even talked about it with regard to this lecture team that's been around in conversation for a while and is actually materializing on its own, as I mentioned, with all the great stuff that happened in Z-Day 2011. So anyway, I hope that helps. Yes, Jacques not hiding anything, though, so please understand that. There's nothing if you want any information from him, he's happy to explain it to you in the best sort of average technical way so you would understand it. He does a very good job of doing that. Number 8. A major assertion toward the end of moving forward requires some elaboration. You correctly explained that there are two root causes of current wealth. There are two root causes of current wealth and population growth: the advancement of production technology and the abundance of hydrocarbon energy. But then you assert without evidence that the free market capitalist monetary market system has merely rode the wave of these advents. A reasonable scientist may assert that the system triggered these waves and that today's technology would resemble the 15th century without capital markets, and that the power of oil would be unknown without market incentives that drove employment. I meant that drove development, market incentives that drove development. Where might I find a rigorous scientific explanation of how these advents would have inevitably passed had our pre-industrial ancestors adopted a resource-based economy? There is an old saying that necessity is the mother of invention, not profit. If you go back through history and look at those that have actually contributed basically anything that we use today that's been extrapolated into larger order attributes, such as the work of Nikola Tesla, such as the Wright brothers, and all the other great inventors out there, you'll find that in their work, in their amazing intelligence, that they never comment about them wanting money as some major incentive. Their interest was to fulfill necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention. I'd also would draw your attention to the work of Ray Kurzweil, who, in a lecture at Google a number of years ago, points out how the rate of technological change and basically information advancement is irrespective of booms and busts in the cultural climate. You would expect, based on the logic that the market system was the initiator of these types of things, that the rate of technological invention, the rate of ingenuity, if you will, would accelerate, during times of great monetary injection, where everyone is getting more money and there's more incentive because people are being rewarded at a faster rate, and then invention would die down when people have less incentive, when people are struggling, when people can't get money to meet their ends. Historically speaking, that isn't the case. It moves underneath the whole thing. The interest to invent and create, to basically create new technology to solve problems, is underlying. It's not something that's fueled necessarily by money. I'm not saying that money has no place whatsoever, but there's no reason to suspect that just because the market system existed, that we wouldn't be in the state we are today. As far as I'm concerned, when you look at what's actually technically possible, we are, in fact, way behind, decades and decades behind where we should be, because of the fact that established institutions are stifling new technology as we speak so they can preserve their old market share. So a hydrocarbon economy, you don't think we would find hydrocarbons since we didn't have a market system? Once any scientist, technician knew the power of the hydrocarbon economy, obviously everyone would know about it and know its fruits. What makes you think that there would be no movement of this without the market system? Now, we're talking in a highly retrospective disposition, and I do believe the market system is an evolutionary attribute. It's evolutionarily evolved, and we have gone through this system. Now we have to get out of it because it's now hindering us dramatically. So then maybe there was a place for it, but there's absolutely no reason to assume that progress, and I mean true progress. I don't mean progress in the sense of being able to go buy a $5,000 Prada bag. That isn't progress. Progress is the resolution of disease. Progress is the ability to create more efficiency, to continue the scale of inventions for the longest longevity, to create sustainability. Progress really is advanced sustainability and creating a society that meets the human necessity without the heavy burden of stress and everything else. So I'm not quite sure what you even measure as progress, in fact. If we say that we live in the wealthiest time of the world, what does that mean? Just because we have access to all this crap that the market system creates doesn't constitute progress. So I bring it back to that basic level, but there's no reason to assume, A, that hydrocarbons would not be spread throughout the world, and if, by some means, if the market system didn't exist. It doesn't really matter. They easily could have been done in another way. And as far as the so-called technological progress, there's all reason to assume that technological interest, technological invention, as the mother of necessity, the necessity is the mother of invention. These things are not carried through monetary interest. Your average dickhead Wall Street guy isn't inventing anything. Those are out constantly trying to make money. They don't want to rock the boat. They want to gain money. They don't want to actually produce new advents into the system that can, change the system, because that's against what the market system wants as well. So I apologize for the slightly convoluted answer, because it's hard for me to even know what you're describing. As far as the film is concerned, to reiterate, both attributes easily could have materialized and evolved without the market system. And I think that the influx of more energy, of almost infinite energy, if you will, meaning that we'll never have a series of shortages if we played our cards right and did the right thing with the multiple sources of energy we have at our disposal now, renewables, coupled with the rate and scale of human ingenuity, which exists on its own. Again, you go back and look at all the great inventors. These things are actually would be accelerated in a resource-based economy, because there'd be nothing to actually hold them back. And as I stated in the RT interview, it's all about making things that contribute to society to help your betterment. So I am constantly trying to improve myself on multiple levels and finding new ways to reduce my stress and whatever actions that I have to move into. And you can relate that to just about anything. And I think that simple motivation, that personal motivation, will move forward and continue the progress that we see, also with the back understanding that whatever I do will affect the world as well. Whatever the world does will affect me. And I think that's a much safer and a much more progressive form of incentive system than what we have today, by all means. Okay, number 9. Question: Earth Day was once a historic event, and now you hardly hear about it. The activism and inspiration that the first Earth Day brought was monumental. We are in need for a real revolution around the globe with an environmentalist intent and the goal of an RBE. How can we reach the global population and transform Earth Day to V-Day? Well, that's a unique idea. It's the end of the question. Earth Day, I appreciate Earth Day, but at the end of the day, the end of the Earth Day, is also kind of a tongue-in-cheek attribute to it. It's almost like I've always questioned the Earth conscious attribute. It is indeed important, but I never felt like any solutions ever came out of the whole Earth Day kind of phenomenon. But the environmentalist issue, if I don't understand how any environmentalist can't understand, our direction, considering everything that we talk about is based on the environment as the first starting point. Really, it's a connection between Earth systems and human systems. That's what we're doing, and the resource-based economy is the bridge between the two, the closest point, the closest line, the straight line, I'm tired today, between point A and point B. So it blows my mind how the environmentalist community seems to not get what we're talking about yet. I think they will eventually, as all of their activist initiatives can systematically fail and continue to fail. And they'll find out for themselves. But anyway, I don't know about V-Day. I can't spend too much time on the question. I wish, we need a better conscious day. I mean, Z-Day, in a way, could hopefully transcend these ideas, and we'll see what happens. But I hear what you're saying. Number 10. It seems that the most commonly held position about when a resource-based economy policy would ever be considered as an honest, legitimate way of self-governance is if a significant majority of the world's population loses faith in the system, and the most commonly held position amongst many members of our movement seem to think that this can only happen if there is some sort of catastrophic collapse scenario. My question is, does Peter see any possibility of somehow arrange our various system into some positions that we can somehow direct policy laws, whatever, toward a resource-based economy, abundance, sustainability, etc.? Is a systemic collapse the only way he thinks for our BE to come into reality? End of question. Well, I do not want systemic collapse. I've said this numerous times. I'm just watching and presenting data. That's all I'm doing. we know that biopsychosocial pressures, are going to be what wake up people that are basically lulled to sleep in the system, even those that are suffering but think that their suffering is just the natural nature of things and there's no way out of it, and that the market system is the end all and this is the end of evolution, end of social evolution, and it's the free market, that's it, billion people starving, this is the apex and the best we can do, it's just our human nature, blah, blah, blah. No, I don't want systemic collapse, and I certainly don't promote anything like that. But there is a caveat here, and I think that as the system continues to fail, people are going to take non-monetary means to get what they need through, say, time banks or other forms of barter, getting out of cities and doing sustainable things. And the more people get out of the economic model, the more of an influence it's going to have on the failure of that model, because cyclical consumption is going to drop. And this is a natural gravitation as the system fails, is that its failure will accelerate. Now, I do think we're in for more or less a slow grind for the time being. I don't think within the next couple of months, you're just going to wake up and everything's on fire and everyone's running in circles screaming. That's not how it's going to play out. It's going to play out in a slow grind, and our goal in the movement is to show people as this grind continues and unfortunately accelerates, that there is a resolution, that it doesn't have to be this way, that the suffering is not necessary, and that's why we're here. And all the difficulty that we face, that's why we're here. So is there a way, as you mentioned, that you point out in the question, is there a way to step-by-step? Yes, there are plenty of things that could be done through government to ease this process and to help things, but those things go completely against everything that the market system stands for. That's the problem. I don't think Obama could pull off what FDR did during the Great Depression, which was explicit socialist application. It had to be. There was no other way to resolve the failures that occurred during the Great Depression than to create a socialist construct. Otherwise, you would have absolute civil unrest, disobedience, and they knew that. And unfortunately, I don't think the Obama or any of these administrations or the people behind them are smart enough to see what's actually coming, frankly. Well, I take that back. Some of them do. The renovation of FEMA camps and things like this, I think, have some semblance of acknowledgement that there is something on the horizon and the powers that be are preparing for it. And it is related to the economy. But anyway, that's for another conversation. It is a speculation. It's not a conspiracy. I just think that as with anything, the governments do foreshadow things, and they do know how to preserve themselves best, and they're thinking many, many steps ahead as far as their own self-preservation. So, yes, they could do things. In fact, go back to my radio show called The Transition, a number of shows back, and I actually talk about a kind of a socialist step-by-step method to achieve a resource-based economy. But, of course, I state as a caveat off the bat that I don't feel it's actually going to work out that way. There are numerous attributes of transition I could talk about, but it's very hard to predict, and unfortunately I think a lot of people are going to be smacked around in this system in order for them to wake up and realize that we have to do something different. You would think, though, and I'll end this point with this point, that as much suffering as exists in the world, that people would be extremely angry, more so than they seem to show. And there's just some kind of placating attribute that exists that stops people from wanting to move out of the system. It's almost like they've become comfortable in their misery, Anyway, number 12. What, in your opinion, is the definition of a true centrally planned economy? Many free market individuals reference totalitarian states such as the Khmer Rouge, the Bolsheviks, and the Soviet Union as centrally planned economies. How do the tenets within a resource-based economic model constitute what could be truly defined as centrally planned? And given this potential misconception of central planning by free market enthusiasts, wouldn't a true definition constitute a true name despite the irrelevancy of labels? Great question. A true centrally planned economy, in the view of a resource-based economy, is really a scientifically planned economy, or a designed economy. Let's put it that way. The problem with the notion of a centrally planned economy is it assumes that the state is the initiator. This is the rhetoric you hear by all those anti-communist people, from G. Edward Griffin to Stefan Molyneux to all of them, is that it's all about the state. They can't envision any other form of economic structure, of collaborative structure, without this nefarious state that dictatorially tells everyone what to do and sends them to re-education camps if they don't comply. That isn't what a resource-based economy it is at all. First of all, it's a scientifically designed economy, which means everything from the ground up is designed to be as efficient as possible without any human interest whatsoever except to meet human necessity. In other words, no human opinion. Roads, streets, buildings, the very infrastructure of construction, the very mechanics of construction, the dynamics therein are all technically evaluated for whatever relevance they have to a particular area. If you live in a tornado or a tsunami-prone area, obviously you're going to construct the buildings to meet those needs, and money will not be an issue. It's done correctly. It's done technically right. Not a monetary reality, but a technical reality. And if you simply can get that point on your belt, you can trash any of the centrally planned arguments and throw them right out the window, because it's based on a gigantic projection. The people that complain about a centrally planned economy and prefer the free market don't seem to understand that the people engaged in the free market, you and I, and all the other billions of hands that are making the invisible hand, which is supposed to lead to progress, the big caveat is that no one knows what the hell they're doing. It assumes that people have an educated manner of engaging resources and that somehow it's going to be efficient and sustainable and that corporations are going to produce the best because they can. But no, everything's against it. The market system is intrinsically against sustainability and efficiency because it will reduce cyclical consumption, and hence the demand for labor, and the system will slow and to a crawl and basically stop through time if efficiency was put forward. So a design-based economy is a ground-up system that's scientifically accurate. That's it. And as far as the fear of central planning, again, that becomes from a totalitarian interest. People can live in a planned economy, and through a technical system of interaction, everyone can have a voice. Everyone can have a say as far as what the next stage of whatever project might be, but it's evaluated by an AI system that makes it technically viable. I know that's hard for people to listen to. People don't understand that, but intellect is a technical process, and in the future, humans will not get into a boardroom to design an automobile. The automobile will be input. The purpose of the automobile will be input into an AI system that has access to the variables that the component attributes of all physical phenomenon, from the metals, from the thermodynamic processes and the science behind what it means to run an engine and everything else. And the car will be manufactured in one swoop design from the ground up by the computer system. This is the future, and this is what efficiency means. It's a technical reality. And people will be able to engage that system, but they will know that they live in a technical reality, so their engagement is always going to be secondary to the absolute efficiency of the system. Now, that might sound spooky to people, too. They think of movies like, I, Robot or 2001 Space Odyssey. It's not about a computer telling you what to do. It's about a computer showing you what the most efficient process is for whatever goal you're seeking to accomplish, and you continue to feed data into that, which it evaluates and will tell you whether it's been done before, whether it can't be done, whether it's against the laws of nature as they know it, etc. So I've jumped into that, and I probably shouldn't have, because it's a huge topic in and of itself. But to go back to the central point of your question, essentially planned economy is a scientifically designed economy with people interacting, putting in new data and information. If someone wants to engage the system, to invent something, it's there for them to do so. Nothing holds them back, nothing monetary. If something's approved and it meets a social need, it's immediately put into operation to send to factories to be produced, depending on what it is, or send to interdisciplinary teams, which is the human attribute of the system, which is there to simply maintain the system, just like anyone maintains a factory. These people maintain the city systems, and of course, all the belligerents cry, corruption, corruption, we can't have anyone in charge of anything. God forbid there's such a thing as any sort of form of intellectual authority. Yet simultaneously, the same people go to dentists, they go to doctors, they go to physicians, they go to architects. Why? Because these are trusted authorities. And it's the exact same type of train of thought that will move when it comes to a system not based on differential advantage, money, and politics. Authorities will emerge, but they're not authorities that tell you what to do. They just happen to be educated in the fields that they work in and are trusted and rewarded by the trust of the population to simply do what's right. And if they don't do what's right, how does it benefit them? It really can't. And only a form of mental illness could have someone deviate, or a huge mistake where someone would deviate into something that could be detrimental to the human society. And due to redundancy built into the system, it would easily be overcome too. So corruption isn't even a possibility, really, when the mechanics of a resource-based economy is actually set up, which will have such redundancy based not upon the assumption of corruption, but the assumption of error, the assumption of human error, which always has to be compensated for. So, anyway, I have to move on. I can't believe how much time I've spent on that one. I'm already at the hour mark, I think. Number 13, is the Zeitgeist Movement willing to help people with know-how to cut their dependencies from the current system? For example, create user guides with detailed instructions how to make their own electricity and grow their own food, etc. Excellent question. In a future broadcast, I'd like to talk about things people can do to sort of prepare themselves. This isn't a territory I typically engage in, but I've seen the necessity of this from the work of people like Michael Rupert. And I think there's actually another question coming up about that. There is a need for people to basically have a general understanding of how to operate and deal with problems that might arise, such as the electricity going out, such as stores shutting down, natural disasters, failed economic systems, local governments shutting down due to budget crises. There's lots of things that we have in store for us in the future. And yes, I think those elements are there, but it is an essential focus of the movement. But I do agree with you, and I will try to make a point to do a show just on that in the future. Z-Bank, a time bank, is one great idea as far as a way for people to start to barter services. I think they're actually creating. In fact, my mother, who's a horticulturist, it's mainly what she does for her own personal interest. That's what she does in her retirement now. She does horticulture, and basically she was telling me about these vertical farms now that you can put in your home, where you can grow vertically in small terrariums, if you will, vertical farm terrariums, a great amount of food because they're vertical. So there's lots of independent new technology out that can enable you to be more self-sustainable. And of course, I've talked about this before with Zeitgeist Addendum, so I'm not going to belabor it. But you just have to use some common sense, but I'll try to talk about that in the future as well. And I agree that should be a part of what we describe as a movement, as a basic kind of protection as things get bad. Number 14, have you considered or even been contacted by The Daily Show or the Colbert Report? Also, have you considered trying to get a large article in the Rolling Stone magazine, etc.? Well, end of question. Well, obviously I would do it if I was given the option. You're asking me if I've considered. I have not been contacted, no. Obviously, if any of those people call, any of those large institutions call, I obviously would have an obligation to do that, but not yet. Let's see. Number 15, Peter, might you be able to eventually help pitch, create, or even host a live television show designed to fund the test city or entertain the viewing public, or objectively falsify the Venus Project theory? Just to clarify and reiterate, if the show succeeds as advertised, then the Venus Project will be scientifically falsified, and life on this planet can carry on as disgustingly usual. However, if it objectively fails to disprove the basic Venus Project theories, then the world's fundamentally corrupt and outdated monetary system may swiftly and safely cease to exist. I hope everyone followed that. It's about a television program that can be used to fund the city, but then simultaneously work to enable people to try and disprove it, if I read that correctly. All sorts of ideas there. I mean, I have considered in the past doing a, quote, debunker's challenge, because it's so easy to get frustrated with people coming at us with these strange projections and assumptions. And it's always ad hominem and straw men 99% of the time, what I call the circus. everyone just loves to attack and call names, yet none of them will touch any of the foundational points that we talk about, the market system or the need and logic, ground-up logic that comprises a resource-based economy. So I have thought about doing that, debunkers, Zeitgeist Movement Debunkers Challenge. I just don't have time amongst everything else that's going on to engage that, and we'd have to have a nice team of people to constantly engage those submissions, so it would be quite an active thing. Naturally we get tons of belabored criticisms, and it's probably easier said than done when it comes to having to constantly interact with that, because that people just keep coming back and the blog arguments go and no one listens. So anyway, I won't belabor that. But yeah, I've considered doing that. As far as a television show, sure, that's possible. As far as fully funding a 5-year test city experiment, well, you're talking about $1 billion. I don't know if that's going to be acquired from a television show, but it's an interesting thought. Number 16. Hey, Peter, was wondering if you gave any thought about creating a personal reading list to give to the movement. I know Jock has a reading list, but maybe you have one as well. Also, when will you release the extra interviews and the source guides for Addendum and moving forward? Good question. I'll start with those. I'm trying to get the interviews together in a comprehensible way. I'm really sick of video editing at this stage. I'm sorry, but you're just going to have to wait. I'm really, really tired, and what I had to go through to get moving forward out, it was just far too brutal, and I'm just sick of even looking at a computer. But nevertheless, they'll eventually come out. As far as Addendum and moving forward, source guides, the Addendum guides and fragments, the source guide, moving forward guides and fragments, I'm not super motivated to do that because it's a big ordeal. It has to be type-proofed and read 1,000 times over. And, at the end of the day, all of this stuff can be searched online and found for their validity. You just have to do a little bit of research. It's not like Zeitgeist, the movie, Part 1, for example, where you don't find this information online. It had to be sourced directly. That's different. Addendum, the first section, the fractional reserve lending system, is straight out of Modern Money Mechanics. Everything else is it can be found. It's also Web of Debt. If you read Modern Money Mechanics and Web of Debt, you basically have it set, and the sources are all there for Part 1 of Zeitgeist Addendum. Part 2 of Zeitgeist Addendum is the personal testimony of John Perkins, along with some World Bank attributes, and you can take any of those lines and any of those news reports that are sourced throughout that section and simply punch them up, and you will find the sources that denote that. There's nothing about the World Bank issues or the percentages or any of that can't be found, mostly online that I found it. Or if you simply want to read John's books, Memoirs of an Economic Hitman, I think that's what it's called. Excuse me, I forgot what it's called. Nevertheless, if you read it, he sources it too. And then the third part of Zeitgeist Addendum, of course, third and fourth parts are the Venus Project. You read Jacques' book, The Best That Money Can't Buy, you're there. And, of course, the fourth part is just a big overarching speculative gestural type of thing, and, there's all sorts of stats there that easily can be found as well. So I know that in the back of my mind, so I hate to feel like I have to go way out of my way constantly to support all this data when it's really out there for anyone who wants to take the time to find it. As far as Zeitgeist moving forward, I can say the exact same thing about that. In my work to do that, I'm just going to go back to the sources of all the books of the authors comprised for Part 1. Part 2 is easy to break down. All of that information is readily available and sourceable. And same with all the other parts. It's all there if you want to see it. It's just hard to spend the time. It's like writing novels, and after making the films, it's hard for me to sit down and then make the novel companion guide after it. So anyway, I will eventually have them, though. I promise. Just you have to be patient. I have far too many other things that have come up. Okay, number 17. I would like to know what the Zeitgeist Movement and Venus Project stance is on gender roles in today's society and in the Venus Project future. From what I understand of the Venus Project, I know that people will be able to fulfill any of their desires in learning and items of interest, so that isn't quite the answer I'm looking for. I'm looking for more of an explanation on why women and men are interested in specific activities that become labeled as gender roles outside of environmental conditioning, if there is any other explanation, and what role the existence of gender will play in the Venus Project. Perhaps gender and gender roles would be eliminated in the future, ? End of question. Okay, that's a big conglomerate of ideas there. I don't take really a position on gender roles, per se. I mean, we have a history of oppression, and a lot of traditionalized stuff that people are born into, and they think they're obligated to fulfill a certain role. I'm not. I think the basic notion is equality of the future in the future. You could argue whether humans are truly monogamous or not monogamous. You can argue all that stuff. I've read numerous treatments on such issues by Edward O. Wilson as far as universals between men and women. And yes, there is a physiological and genetic basis to subtle differences between the two sexes, and I think that's relatively obvious. But you have to remember that it's set in motion by the culture. I mean, I think I did a radio interview with someone, and they talked about how their daughter always gravitated towards dolls and their son always gravitated towards toy guns. And I almost fell out of my chair, because that is an example of just a completely erroneous notion of identity. There's no way to truly measure that, because everything is based on culture. There's so many ways to find explanations for why young children gravitate to what seemingly are gender-based roles. There's so many influences of their friends, their parents, the television shows they watch. It's impossible to find a universal. Underlying nature of human nature, universal. So, I think in the future, gender roles will lose a lot of the bias, because all of the things that existed as through evolution, as the hunter-gatherers, women take care of the children, the men go out and fight. That's a physiological genetic attribute. Men are naturally larger than women as evolution has progressed, stronger in their physiology, and so they would go out and hunt. And women, since they're the childbearing organism, they take care of the children as the close connection. You can see how these things evolve naturally. So, that's a very difficult question. I don't really consider it one that I think is truly tangible or relevant. If there is a genetic attribute to certain elements of behavior, it's probably less just straight genetic and more certain endorphin and biochemical issues that work through each organism, and certain physiological attributes of size that I've just mentioned earlier that tend to create certain gender-specific roles. So I'll leave it at that. You're asking a very difficult question, but I will say that in the future that there's no reason that gender roles should be an issue in any kind of real way. There is a natural gravitation of certain biopsychosocial phenomenon. Children do need their mother, These are well-established issues, but I don't think gender roles, to answer your question, would be, quote, eliminated in the future, because I think as an overarching true basis of gender roles is what has evolved, what seems to be universal throughout the evolution of human society. Not women being receptionists and men being the boss. These are artificial gender roles, no subordination, none of that. But the need for the mother to be there for the child, and the different roles that parents play that have a very firm biopsycho-evolutionary effect on children's upbringing. As a general example, these will probably exist, but the other ones will be removed, the artificial ones. Number 18. To what extent was the outsourcing of jobs in the agricultural and industrial sectors due to technological outsourcing and not due to economic outsourcing? To clarify, can you provide the data necessary to show that the types of jobs that were and are being lost in these sectors was and is currently due in large part to automation? How much of the job losses in these sectors is simply down to companies going offshore to exploit weaker nations into doing these types of jobs for us, manufacturing and Nike sweatshops, etc.? End of question. Excellent question. Well, first of all, if you track the long history of technological unemployment, it can't possibly be economic outsourcing, because it's global. Since the invention of the plow, which is the start of early technology, basically the agricultural revolution is the most most mechanized now, and there's very, very small percentage of people that work in agriculture in the world, especially in the West, of course, which is a modern state. You begin to see the evolution very, very clearly. So then everyone moved to industrial facilities. Then the Industrial Revolution had powered machines. Now mechanization has kicked in towards the entire manufacturing sector. Now everyone, I believe it's 96% in the West, works in the service sector. And that's now being phased out by kiosks and other forms of automation, which most of it could be phased out almost tomorrow if it was applied, as I stated before. So you have to look at it from a technical standpoint, first of all, that what's possible. But that's still an aside. To answer your question, it's very, very clear globally what the evolution has been. And it's not the movement for the America to move in the service sector isn't just because we've outsourced all our agricultural and manufacturing jobs to other countries. So that's kind of ridiculous to think that. I'm not making fun of your question, but if you think about the global view of the evolution of mechanization, it becomes very, very clear that technological unemployment is very real, and technology has been the driver of every economic change of labor, every labor change, every sector change of human labor that since the history of humanity, and it's only going to keep moving forward. And unfortunately, or very fortunately, in my opinion, it will move forward to the extent where humans simply can't compete at all due to its exponential increase. So I hope it answers your question. Number 19. Since the movement has been around for a while, would it be a good idea to repeat a survey of how many members are in the movement, seeing as the first official census was conducted some 2.5 years ago and the opening of the website? It would be good to recheck these stats, perhaps also finally get around to asking the members of such a census news questions which need to be answered. Things such as, are you active in a local chapter? Excuse my exhausted reading of that question. My eyes are failing me. Yes, getting a consensus to ask basic questions, local chapter questions. This is all in the works. In fact, there was an overhaul of the general mailing list, and I do have a note to send out a mailing list to make sure people know. In fact, we've done this to get people, to remind people that there are chapters across the world. If they're not in one, they need to get into one or hopefully start one if they don't have one. And other than that, there is other data that we could pull, sure. We'll get there. I mean, I think you're very right in the need to kind of get a better assessment, but it's going to take a lot of people to be able to engage that type of feedback, people that we don't really have right now. Remember, we operate without money, so it's difficult for us. Everyone's volunteering. That's, as I said earlier in the broadcast, we have a lot of organizational work we have to do to spread this more equitably amongst all of our volunteers, because it's very, very difficult, especially for me, to even keep up with a fraction of what needs to be done. Number 20, I've heard talk of a new global movement website to replace the current one for a while now. Can you please give us an update on this? As a side note, I feel it would be extremely beneficial to have a more streamlined way of directing current or prospective members toward a local chapter to them. Yes, there has been there's been talk of an overhaul of the design of the website, and more importantly, the back end of the website, the entire appearance, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast. So yes, that's on pace 2. And as far as a streamlined way to get people, prospective members, towards content and local chapters, I completely agree with that as well, and I've been working with that. I was even trying to get an introduction. Well, I did the TED Talk introduction, but to try and do another introduction that's a little bit less technical, just to show people, maybe in like a video form. In fact, I was actually going to try and get Brandy to do this, and I still intend to basically show people where to go on the website in a video form, how to start, where the chapters are, and how to do all of this. People obviously can access this stuff, and it's been working fairly well, but it isn't as streamlined as it needs to be, and I completely agree with you. So we're getting there. It's a huge progression. Number 21, the way Zeitgeist moving forward was done was classy, but can you tell us why you didn't choose to inform the viewers about there being chapters all over the world, and maybe include a call to action as you did in Zeitgeist Addendum? Zeitgeist moving forward, and the question, Zeitgeist moving forward was basically, it stands on its own, and I felt that the most critical things to point out to people were the state of affairs today and the logic behind a resource-based economy. Jumping to explaining the movement through narration is not the place of that. It's just too much, way too much. And I think, the call to action addendum still exists in that basic way, but I wanted to be a little more poetic, more gestural, and less forcive, less forcible. What's the word I'm looking for? Not feeling like there's pressure on the audience to do anything per se. You know what I mean? And that's the way Moving Forward was constructed. And I really couldn't make it any longer. But anyway, so if anyone wants to see it, they see that huge banner at the end for the Zeitgeist Movement, and they can initiate it on their own. I would hope that they would be intrigued enough to do so. Number 22, I heard you recently at Michael Rupert's audio show suggesting that you have in mind maybe something in the near future introducing what you referred to as Z notes. Well, hold on, let me correct you. It's actually a Z bank. Let me continue the question. As implementation similar to time banks and other complementary currency solutions, well, non-currency solutions, in fact, noticing that you have referenced in the past Bernard Léotard in various bits of your work, I shall infer that you are familiar with his and others' ideas and research into the alternative currency domain. Question: could you please share your thoughts about such ideas of adopting currencies that are designed in a way to encourage different, more positive patterns of behavior, as proclaimed by some, that can partly promote a sustainability abundance, as well as managing to effectively address problems like technological unemployment, short-term thinking, and so on? This could be an effective transition medium that we could at least try and see how it goes. Yes, transitionally speaking, the time bank issue isn't currency-oriented. It's based on a barter system, a technically generated barter system where more or less certain arbitrary values are set based on the type of labor that's performed. It's not a perfect science, though. But it could be very effective and very beneficial for people that simply can't get work and really need services. So I think it's a very humane concept. As far as Bernard Léotard and other, true ideas of alternative currencies, there's a lot of speculation on that, monetary reform. I think transitionally there are some things, and in fact John McMurtry talks about this as well. The Treasury could output non-debt-based currency. There's a lot of things that could be done in transition, but they don't resolve the core attributes of the problem, which we always come back to. Yes, I think in the future we should approach some intermediary systems, transitional systems, if you will, and I think that would actually also ease a lot of tensions with a lot of groups out there that don't accept what we talk about. They think we're too radical. And if they see that we do see the merit in such ideas, it would help to bridge the difference. But it's important to continually point out, again, that it's not the solution, and of course I think you know that. So there's a lot of great ideas, and I agree with some type of transitional system. But I also think that it could move without there being a transitional system too. It could move in a way that goes step by step to use automation to generate abundance and then offset the market system very systematically to an extent where money just starts to get less and less in circulation, and then it becomes not even needed. So I agree with you, but there's also a lot of other ways that it could happen. If anyone has any ideas about transitional currency systems, obviously we have a lot of Ron Paul advocates and a lot of other individuals like Bernard Léotard and many others that promote these ideas. I'm certainly interested in hearing feedback on that. I don't pretend to be an expert on it, but granted, I do think there's a place for it. Excuse me. All right, where am I? Number 23, where are the places of worship in the presentations of a resource-based economy? We don't expect religion to be a thing of the past by the time we reach a resource-based economy, do we? What about things that are beyond efficiency but are matters of taste? For example, we can order practical clothing, but what if someone wants to order sexy clothing? What if someone wants to customize or personalize the design of their products? Okay, so there's basically 3 questions there. Places of worship. Well, places of worship are probably wherever they want to be. If you were to design a city system, you could, and it's of the interest of the population to have places of worship, then you simply build the places of worship in. Of course, different facilities have rotating functions as well, so you could have a place of worship which also functions in other ways when it's not a place of worship. So that's really open to the values of the culture at that point in time. There's no problem there. As far as the second part of your question, what if someone wants to get sexy clothing? Well, listen, or in fact, I'll answer both your questions. If someone wants to customize or personalize the design of their products, in the future, people will have, when it comes to clothes, I think they'll have home replicators at this stage. I think through nanotechnology and 3D printing, It doesn't even necessarily have to be nanotechnology. People will begin to design their own clothes, and the idea of stores producing clothes will become a thing of the past. I really believe that small items, and that's why I had that huge section on 3D printing and the rep wrap, which is a very primitive form of it, but heavily poetic in its ideology as a self-replicating 3D printer, is the point. The point being is that people will begin to create things themselves. They'll, just as you have a dishwasher in your home, just as you buy a computer with a printer, it'll become natural for people to have large-scale printing systems to create basic necessities of things that they utilize commonly, like clothes. There's no reason for that. You don't need some complex system to print out clothes. That could be done in a very, very efficient and sustainable way in creating very high-quality clothes, and simultaneously with that, you could design your own clothes. I think customization of just about everything is on pace, even the customization of chairs and things of this. There are numerous forms of robotics that are being developed now that are modular, and they can adapt themselves in various ways and form multiple types of functions. And I think you'll eventually be able to print designs, or not technically print them, but have them constructed based on your own designs. So if you have a specific chair that you want, and you have a facility near you that does the type of production of chairs, you could design it in a program that could be user-friendly, like a user-friendly 3D program, exactly how you want it, and you, boom, with one click, send it over to production facilities in the city, and you go and get it, or it's delivered to you once it's created. Perfectly customizable. This is very contrary to what people think about within a designed economy. They think everything has to be the same, that everything's standardized. No, you would have more freedom and expression, if you will, through what you choose to create than anything else. And things can be created at will. They wouldn't have to be mass-produced in such a way if the system was designed to create customized goods. Once the robotics, which already exist today, become more abundant, that can firmly adapt themselves to create customizable goods. So, let's see, number 24, Michael Rupert said, question, Michael Rupert said the collapse is within the next few months and the time to prepare is now. He said this at Z-Day in L.A. Should I assume his assumptions of oil services and social behavior after lowering oil rates and skyrocketing prices of infrastructure state during crisis is right? During the crisis is right. I fail to see how social and economic collapse would immediately result in total infrastructural collapse. Even if the general population cannot afford to live and most workers vanish, most of the infrastructure will still be functional. So do we believe Rupert and jump for safety now and forget about the world? Forget about what world of been possible. Sorry, your language is broken here. What would have been possible, or do we stay on a path of advocacy and focus on what's possible and coming? I'll say this. I can't speak for Michael Rupert. I do agree with his overall assessment of what's in store, but I would say that it's probably not going to happen as rapidly as he sees it happening, because I see a slow grind. The accents of the slow grind could cause pandemonium. Just think what would happen if one of the major unions that moves food across the U.S. continent, for example, goes on strike, and suddenly no stores get food. Think what would happen if one very strapped state, such as California, suffers an extreme environmental disaster or a power outage, and they can't even afford to fix the problems that arise. There are numerous things. There's no fail-safes anymore right now. Everything's running at the seat of their pants. People are struggling, just getting along in a basic sense. So all it takes is a certain number of causal things to trigger other things, and then you lead to different levels of catastrophe, civil unrest, and the lack of people to get food, water, and the like. So that's what I think can really accelerate this. But I see the movement of economic growth being offset by the rise in the price of oil, which will stifle progress, because you can't have economic growth without a rise in the price of oil, without a rise in the demand of oil, because that's what growth is more consumption. And since hydrocarbons are the basis of the economy, there's no way you're going to see an economic recovery in a hydrocarbon economy with a resource that's getting higher in price and going more scarce and subject to even more turbulence now as the Middle East is under so much instability, and Saudi Arabia is probably next, which, as we know through the WikiLeaks cable, there's good evidence to show that Saudi Arabia has also been lying about its oil supplies. So, Rupert is more extreme than I. I think there's a slow grind ahead of us. And while I think people should prepare for it, as I stated earlier, I think we should also still keep positive. And as things get worse and worse, show people what's possible so they know what to do and know what to step up for once they can't handle it anymore, once it finally does reach a point of capitulation. But again, the infrastructure isn't being repaired. Yes, this is true. The states have no money. Catastrophes, if they happen, could easily make a stifling event that I could see in line with what Rupert might predict. But if things continue in the kind of basic way they have now, without huge cataclysmic events to interfere and accelerate problems, I think we have many years of this just slow, inching, horrid, grueling decline. It's sort of, imagine if you're looking at an economic growth chart and it goes up, comes down, goes up, but a little bit less, comes down, goes up a little bit less than that, comes down, sort of like a triangle that has arched with the slope, the long side sloping downward. That's the way I see the decline of the economic system as it grinds to a halt. Not to mention the debt and everything else. But so anyway, I think I've answered your question. I'm very long-winded today, so I apologize about that. I think we have a slow grind ahead of us as opposed to simply a number of months before the bottom falls out and suddenly everyone runs around with their hair on fire. I don't see it working like that exactly. Okay, number 25. I'm going to have to go much more quickly here. I'm starting to run out of time. In my opinion, movies are just the tip of the iceberg regarding the Zeitgeist Movement. The important, significant, and most comprehensible informations come from interacting with the forum, listening to your talk shows, watching Jock Lecture, and so on. How do we get people to not just watch the movies and forget about them? How do we get people interested to look further into materials given? Is it really just up to them? First of all, the films are my films as my own personal communication. We have our own content for the movement. Let's not forget that. Moving Forward is a little bit of an exception. But while I encourage people to use Moving Forward since it was created for that purpose, please remember that it's still a gestural expression of myself and my own values. It's not a technical treatment on, in the kind of way that my lectures are approached or the orientation guide is approached or anything that we have that supports any media we have, that supports our direction. So keep that in mind. And people just, obviously, if they don't have the initiative to look themselves, what else can you do? You give it to them and you hope that they're willing to take the time and they're intrigued enough to follow through. Number 26, how come you didn't mention technological unemployment in the TED Talk? In your last radio show, you gave advice for people to mention it who are not familiar with our concept because it's simpler to understand. Good question. In the TEDx talk, I had to really think about what I was going to say for the 14 to 18-minute block they gave me, which was incredibly difficult, so I had to go from one train of thought. Technological unemployment is briefly talked about, actually, I believe, in the mechanization automation section, or at least it's implied. It's at least implied, so I just wanted to stick with what I thought was most important, and that was the basis of human necessity and how it relates to the natural world. So, I'd still agree with that, but there's many different angles we can come from to talk about this. I just thought that was the most relevant. Number 27, concerning the major motion film being promoted by the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist Movement, what is the target cost? If the goal can't be met or the project gets derailed for any number of reasons, what happens to all the individual donations? This was supposed to be one of our most efficient means of progress, yet planning and thought surrounding the effort seems to be insufficient relative to the goal. Well, the Venus Project, this is their project, and I don't know what their target cost is. They've been talking about this for years and years, and I'm leaving this more or less to them. I'm helping on their behalf to look for investors and studios. I think it's going to take something larger than any kind of basic donation to get this done if they want to put something on the scale of what I think that they're shooting for. And that takes an outrageous amount of money, to be perfectly frank. But I do suggest you move those questions to them directly. I can't answer that. This is basically their project. Number 28, with some of the recent publicity that Anonymous has received for similar causes as ours, how can we get Anonymous on board with our movement, and would we want to? Is there publicity the kind that we want? Well, to answer your question, I don't know if Anonymous really is supporting us publicly. It's kind of hard to tell, isn't it? I did see a forum post since they're anonymous, anyone can pretend to be anonymous. But granted, some people have identified and think that it's legitimate. And obviously, any group that's that's working towards, exposing the shenanigans of this system and wants to see a better world, I would hope would join us. And there's no limits to those individuals that have such pursuits. I think Anonymous should be careful in their distinction of their actions. Because obviously the first thing that the state's going to do is label them as a terrorist organization. But as long as they stay peaceful and they do things that don't pose any type of harm, there's nothing that's in disagreement as far as I'm concerned. Their work to help support WikiLeaks and everything else, I think, is very honorable. And it goes to show, again, that it doesn't matter how much security the state thinks they can create, there's always going to be a subculture of people, whether working positive or negative, that can get around just about anything. Anonymous can take down just about anything, as far as I'm concerned, based on what I've seen them do. That there's really nothing that they can't do. So it goes to show that security doesn't work when it comes to the big state issue of security and the fear of terrorism and everything else. And I think that's a wonderful statement that they've made, especially in the digital age. No one's safe, and what that means is that we have to come together in a different way. We don't want groups to hijack our computers and steal our information. We don't want them to have a motivation to do so, and I think that's an important point. And I really appreciate that from that angle what Anonymous shows is possible, and the fact they do it for a positive reason is great to see, as opposed to people just abusing such power. Number 29. Can you elaborate on the economic calculation problem in more detail? This is a common criticism that needs to be addressed more prominently. I'm not sure why people keep bringing this up as some mythic problem. The economic calculation problem is a Mises concept about centrally planned economies that apparently without money there's no rational way to assess demand, distribution, and everything that moves an economy. Apparently without money you don't know what to do with inventory, you don't know what people's demands are, and that's just utterly nonsense. It's a complete stupid straw man. Obviously, you could set up a non-monetary based system in a small society, create the goods of that society. Let's imagine 50 of us lived in a small commune, and the borders were clearly defined for us. In other words, the limits of what we could do were clearly defined, and we adapted our values accordingly to that. I state that because in the current market model, everyone thinks they have infinite wants. But that's the propaganda of the system. That isn't a natural human element to have infinite material wants. That's what the system demands in order to maintain the consumption that's required to maintain demand and hence labor and keep the system going. So if we lived in a small commune or whatever, 50 people, and we understood the limits and we had our values adapted to the limits of our carrying capacity, if you will, it'd be very, very easy to assess the demand and interests of each individual and to meet that demand, everyone working together to make sure there's no overruns or shortages. It's very, very simple. And in a resource-based economy, it's simply done through computer calculation. It's as simple as that. Demand calculation is easy to assess. You simply poll the community initially, and then you track the inventory of your supply houses, and you regulate it in one gigantic system. There's no mystery to it, and I have no idea why people keep bringing this up as though it's some complex thing to assume. It's very, very easy. All it takes is the data and a tracking system and a trend system, and to foreshadow what's needed and what isn't and how to meet those needs. And as far as invention isn't assessed by money. Money doesn't create invention. Necessity creates invention. Invention will materialize through a technical process, as I described earlier. Number 30, just a quick light question. Have you received any contact from the Venus Project in regard to their movies? If yes, are you given any role inside the new Venus Project movie, handling effects for sound or anything? End of question. Of course, we're always working together with the Venus Project, except I'm out of the movie thing for a while. I'm sick of it. Their interest to make the movie, again, has been theirs long before they met me. So I'm trying to help with trying to get a larger order investment or a house to pick it up. I really wish they had a script writer to get the script done that could be brought to others. I'm trying to help in more of a technical background way. As of right now, I still plan to continue the Zeitgeist film series. in my low budget way. I'm not interested in high budget because there's no way you can possibly do high budget without the interference of studios and investors and basically people that want to return and want to interfere. That's not my game. I don't want anyone to interfere with what I do. That's why I like the low budget independent phenomenon. Completely independent. In fact, as you all know, I refuse even distribution by any corporation. So yes, I mean those options are there. We're still waiting to see how it evolves. That's their project, and I'm just trying to give guidance and help what I can to see it just get off the ground in any type of way. Unfortunately, the money that they're looking for is going to be pretty difficult to come by. Number 31, for Z-Day 2012, should all the chapters and members meet in a central location like Lincoln Memorial to show our mass? Hey, great intuition. That's exactly what I stated early on. Yes, I'm very much considering having a big, unified Z-Day event for 2012. If people are willing to make the journey to whatever that location is, I think ideally New York, ideally the theater at Madison Square Garden is what I'm shooting for, but there are many other theatrical venues of a similar capacity around the area, and maybe even other countries. I'm not quite sure. I've been in contact with a lot of different institutions. The budget requirements are huge for something like that, so that's a little bit of a hindrance. I'm not doing that well financially to afford, what would be like a $50,000 to $70,000 venue rental. I mean, come on. There's a lot of background work that has to occur for that to be made possible. The assurance that money can be recovered, because I certainly can't afford that. It would have to be something would have to be arranged as far as a ticket system, where, in fact, it's like a ticket system where people will buy the tickets in advance, which moves to help the rental cost. And if the rental doesn't happen, then I would return all of the prepaid ticket money to those. But we need at least 5,000 people, I think, to pull that off efficiently and to make the effect necessary, as I described earlier in the broadcast. But I agree with you. Number 32, Peter, what do you think of getting Jacques to design some underground cities for the movement? The advantages are many compared to building on land. Interesting question. I'm trying to remember if Jacques had any designs for underground cities. That would be a great question to ask him directly. I would not be surprised if he's given that some thought. I know he has enclosure cities, which are kind of similar in the idea. I could see how the enclosure cities could basically become underground cities if you think about it. But interesting idea. That's something that I'm not particularly familiar with, but I'll bring that up next time I talk to him. But email him directly. I'm sure he might have a curious response or effective response. Let's see. Where am I? Number 33, hi Peter, do you think it's important for the purposes of the Zeitgeist Movement, the Venus Project, to build an experimental city somewhere? And if you think it is so, how can we do so? Well, basically, you're talking about exorbitant amounts of money. In my view of building the first experimental city, it's not going to come financially. It's going to come from a country that's willing to just do it for their own betterment, knowing that they have to be sustainable. The biopsychosocial pressure to force them to build sustainable entities, sustainable communities, not just sustainable communities, but a true city, advanced sustainable community, city system. People ask these questions like it's something that can be accomplished by the means of the movement when you're talking about $1 billion to billions of dollars required to do something like that due to the cost efficiency mechanism and all the hurdles that would come from attempting to put this together. I have thought of smaller scale projects. For example, what if you built an extremely large model where it wasn't a life scale model. It was a model, say, 100 to 200 feet in diameter. But it was a scaled model that showed all the technical workings of the system. You could build it, for example, on the Venus Project's property. And it's heavily technical. It just shows everything about it. It shows the automated system. It shows the infrastructure. It shows how the agriculture is produced automatically. And you could even mock this up, maybe even do it legitimately with different forms of vegetation to create that sort of mock-up feel, if you know what I'm referring to. And create a very large-scale model that literally works. And that's something that I've actually thought about, which could be cool as a side project. But the city system We have a long way to go, and if you're thinking about doing it financially, you have an extremely long way to go, as much as I hate to say it. Number 34, please give your input, if any, on the current crisis in Libya and how would this type of thing be handled within the Venus Project. Well, Libya is locked into an interesting geopolitical position, different from Egypt and the other dominoes that have been falling in those areas regarding economic problems, and hence the civil unrest and other democratic issues, of course, that are on the back burner. But really, it's economic at the very end. All of the turmoil in the Middle East and Africa is all economic at its foundation. So don't forget that. I always cringe when I hear the U.S. pundits and they say that it's something about freedom and democracy. Can we just get them to stop talking about that? If there's anything I could wish upon the mainstream media, is to get them to shut up about the propaganda of freedom and democracy, as though it has anything to do with anything with regard to the problems of these areas. I can assure you that the people of any of these countries would easily accept a non-democratic system with little freedom as they know it, if their needs were actually met. Now, I'm not promoting that, obviously, but when you have 50 to 80% unemployment, which is the norm in these areas, obviously you're going to have social instability because no one's getting their needs met. It's a very obvious situation. So to answer your question, first of all, in the Venus Project, such an idea wouldn't happen. Such a phenomenon of the problems in Libya and the crisis and the protests and the overhaul and the rebellions wouldn't occur because there'd be no basis for such a based form of rebellion and revolution, because the needs would be met. That's the entire point of this system, is to meet people's needs. That's the first prerogative, if you will. So, yeah, I'm just going to have to leave it at that because I'm continually running out of time. Number 35. Are there been any efforts to redesign the website? I already talked about that. Number 36. Jock has repeated the gesture, quote, children can learn anything, unquote. To what level can we teach kids science, say a 6 or 7-year-old? John Paget's theory, sorry if I mispronunciated that, Jean Piaget, I assume it's a French individual, excuse me if I'm butchering that. Theory of cognitive development says that children do not reach the formal operation stage until around 11. This is when individuals could move beyond concrete experiences and begin to think abstractly, reason logically, and draw conclusions from information available, as well as apply all these processes to hypothetical situations. Do you have any information to challenge this notion? Well, I'm sorry to say I'd have to further look into to that type of analysis, but based on what you've denoted, I can see the rationale as far as a maturity of comprehension at about 11, but there's also critical periods that I think they're called in all organisms' development. Critical periods for learning language, critical periods of human development for a lot of different developmental processes, both physiological and intellectual, in the human brain, as the human brain's growing at those early ages. And the learning process is maximized in different ways. It's like a sponge. The kid's just absorbing things, and there's no mystery to this. And I think what Josh's talking about is that it's very simple. It actually goes back to some of the more intuitive issues and pointed out in the first stage of the first part of Zeitgeist Moving Forward, and that is that there are just the organism is trying to figure out what's going on. It's taking in a great amount of information. The brain is literally developing, so the inputs and connections are in a very sensitive position. And I think that's basically all it comes down to. I'm sure there's lots of debate and argument, but I think it's very easy to see that kids, given the right environment, can learn very, very rapidly during those critical periods of time. I mean, there's numerous examples of kids, early ages of 4, 5, and 6 that speak many, many languages, that have engaged in even high levels of math. They're not necessarily geniuses or prodigies. It simply just comes down to the environment of the organism and the response that they're getting. And I think Jock is very, very right when it comes to the fact that we seem to feed children a lot of creative nonsense at those early periods rather than show them physical phenomenon and show them how the world works. I firmly agree with him that if I was a teacher and I had a preschool type of environment or a grade school type of environment, the first thing the kids would be shown would be the natural orders of reality. You'd take them to a garden, you'd teach them how to grow food, you start to teach them about the basic intuition of physical law, about what natural systems are, about what it means to feed yourself, the difference between good and bad biological inputs, if you will. All of that, I think, could be understood and exemplified in a very simple way. So I'll leave it at that. I don't pretend to be some type of expert on child development, but I have read a great number of books on it, and I think there's a lot to be said for those early critical periods if we understand what they mean and we are able to harness them in all of their in the most productive way. Number 37. Once you mentioned philosophy as a useful field in Zeitgeist Addendum, I have noticed now that science has completely substituted philosophy in almost everything you speak and write. Do you have any particular philosophers or ideas in mind that you respect? Well, first of all, science has a philosophical component. I know we can get into semantic arguments about this, but the inferential assessment of science can extend into philosophy and still have a certain basis of thought. It might not be testable, but it's still coming from somewhere. And I look at, certain elements of quantum theory and string theory, to me, border on basically an inferentially assessed philosophy, as abstract as that may sound. Philosophy exists. There are plenty of scientists back in the day were also philosophers. They kind of went hand in hand. It had to do with setting up hypotheses and taking a train of thought to a certain place. But sometimes it moves past science. Sometimes it's not observable phenomenon anymore, and it goes into an area of abstraction which simply can't be tested, and that's where the line is drawn. So I consider philosophy to be a part of the scientific method. It creates hypotheses. It creates the initial ideas. You stumble upon things. There's one great scientist, I remember his name, who stated that he never invented anything. All he ever did was stumble upon the answers through this general kind of route of intuition of working. And I think that's a very interesting way to look at things. So don't assume that they're two utterly separate ideas. I think they share. Well, I think philosophy is a part of science. So I'll kind of leave it at that. And as far as a philosopher, the only philosopher that I it depends on your angle of what you're going for. I mean, philosophy takes multiple definitions these days. I actually consider George Carlin and Bill Hicks to be philosophers in their own right. Their method of communication is of a philosophic nature, and of course entertaining as well. And while also Jiddu Krishnamurti, who's really a scientist in disguise, he asks a great deal of questions that challenge people in a very active mental way. And I think that's another role of philosophy, is to just get people to think about things that they typically wouldn't think about before and see a certain sort of logical merit to that train of thought. It doesn't mean it's scientific per se. It doesn't mean that you could define whatever the conclusions are as scientific. But anyway, I'm running out of time, so I'll leave it at that. Number 38. Let's say I have a house on a hill with a splendid view of all the forests. I also have a nice garden in the yard. Now there's this guy who drops in and sits on the benches whenever he pleases, sleeps in the only bed I have, and even makes modifications to the garden which I don't like. Incompatible personalities here. If presented with this scenario, I wouldn't be able to answer. How would this issue be resolved in a resource-based economy? To finish that. Great question. As the evolution of society continues, and this basic fundamental notion of mutual respect and space, when I speak to somebody, I don't walk right up to them and stand 2 inches from their face when I speak. There's a general, basic, kind of unspoken comfort zone that people have, and their houses often fit that profile as well. It's a unique argument when someone says, well, if there's no, quote, property in your system, anyone can just go into your house and take anything you want, or something like that. But that refuses the basic notions of human decency, when it comes to living together in a society. you're not constantly stepping on everyone's toes if you expect things to work out. There's just a basic intuition, if you will, about how humans can work in a way together without making each other mad, basically, without stepping on each other's toes, without violating someone else's, quote, rights, but they're not technically rights. They're just basic gravitations of intuition. Just like in the wild, two packs of organisms that might not work well together, they keep a distance from each other. They don't invade each other's areas because it leads to conflict. And these types of ideas, I think, will permeate as we evolve. And as the legal system continues, if these types of problems emerge where you have people intruding on your home in a resource-based economy with an access abundance, being in a space where you don't want them to be, here is where the echo of property will have to come back. And you would have regulation. You'd have to have legal regulation to make sure that didn't happen. But let's assume for a second that these are the only examples that comes into play with. You'd have very, very few incidences of this. Not to mention it's counterintuitive anyway. Why would someone even do that if they can get something for themselves, if they can have their own access, if they're provided with the necessities of life, including a home? It's only deprivation that causes such types of intrusions. And in the event there's a mental disorder or some type of strange circumstance, well, there's where your legal issue comes back into play. But we're talking 99% of most legal issues gone. So there's a transitional element here, and the ideal, of course, as Jacques points out, very directly, is that you get rid of all laws, all police, and everything else. But that's what you sort of move towards. It certainly doesn't happen in one swoop, and it's very difficult for us to even think about such ideas in the world that we live in today, which is fueled by all of the baggage, which is now enduring all the baggage of the monetary system and all this deprivation, and we just think that the behavior of human beings today is the way behavior will always be, and the problems will always be the same, which is not the case. So it's a very interesting question, and I think through time, the general respect of each person, people respecting each other's intrinsic necessities, where no one's just taking somebody else's stuff because they know that they need it as well. There's a general mutuality that will work in so-called philosophy, if you will, which will maintain sustainability between people. Reducing conflict. Of course, also having a world of access abundance to alleviate all of the basic need deprivations that exist today. So I hope that answers your question. It's a transitional issue, and it comes down to a basic human respect towards each other, which does not need to be legally defined, because it's right there for you to see, and it's reinforced constantly in our culture. And I think in the future cultures that aren't dependent on money and that do organize society, do design society to actually provide for the human population, such an idea, such a problem will become non-existent. And I also think that the new spawning of community and acceptance will emerge as well, where you might even invite someone into your home that you've never even met, and because there's no reason for you not to trust them. A new sense of community, a new sense of community is a very big part of human development. You can't have human development without community. So the idea of a family extends to your local community. In fact, that's a very real and necessary phenomenon if you go into indigenous cultures. It's not just working with the parents. A kid, for example, a child, needs not only to learn about the parents and how to live, but also needs to learn how to interact with others. So community becomes very, very important in a biopsychosocial phenomenon, and the people that you're engaged in a community are a part of your development and vice versa. And I think that type of respect will meet mutuality as well. So I hope that makes sense. I'm basically out of time, and I'm tired of talking, so... And I'm not quite sure when we're going to start this rotation for the radio show, but I'm going to talk to Ben and others to see how we can organize this. I'd love to get, 2, 3, or 4 people, and we begin to simply alternate every single week to keep it fresh and to keep new ideas flowing, and I think it'd be a great idea. I'm going back to my notes right now to see if there's anything else that I would like to bring up. And no, I think we've just about covered it. A lot of overhauls are going to be happening with the site soon. And the only thing I would remind people is that really, if you have the ability to write and you see something happen in the world, please think about creating a one-page press release, if you will, to describe the way you view that act through the lens of the resource-based economic model. and how whatever that issue may be can be either amplified or resolved or what have you by the work that we talk about and all the attributes therein. I appreciate everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. Have a nice life.